afternoon and welcome to this episode of the Seatrade Maritime Podcast in Conversation series. My name is Emma Howell and I'm Content Director at Seatrade Maritime News. This episode is extra special as it's part of our launch announcement of a strategic charity partnership between Seatrade Maritime and the Mission to Seafarers, which will help raise visibility on the welfare of the 1.89 million seafarers who form the backbone of global maritime trade movement. To find out more about the Mission to Seafarers' vital work, I have the pleasure of chatting to Ben Bailey from the Mission, a Christian welfare charity that serves the needs of merchant crews around the world. Established way back in 1856, it has a long history of supporting the men and women who work at sea, providing them with practical, emotional and spiritual assistance. Welcome, Ben.
Great to be with you, Emma. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into what the mission is, I can see, Ben, that you've been with the charity for 18 years, starting out in the press office and now Director of Programmes. Your role has taken you all around the world and put you in front of many industry heavyweights and leaders. What's kept you with this particular charity and how do you feel that you, Ben, make a difference?
Gosh, well, as I say, it's great to be with you. I think the thing about the shipping industry generally is that people don't really know about it. And certainly I didn't know much about shipping and certainly not about the plight of seafarers until I joined the mission back in 2007. And really, it is, I think, the deep and enduring commitment of the men and women who go to sea and are prepared to deal with long contracts, isolation, long periods away from home, and make huge personal sacrifices, which I find deeply inspiring. And so an opportunity such as that I have with the mission to work with some extraordinary colleagues around the world who provide a wide range of services for seafarers is something which I have found deeply fulfilling. And I think also, you touch on sort of what have I done? And that's a question I probably ask myself regularly. But I think it is the opportunity to have, a talk like this, where there is an opportunity for me to amplify so many of my wonderful colleagues around the world who day in and day out are doing some incredible things many of them are very small acts of kindness, but they have profound and lasting impacts on the over 500,000 seafarers and their families that we serve every year.
So do tell us a bit about the Mission to Seafarers then, please.
Yes, so the Mission to Seafarers, as you've said, was founded back in 1856. We're one of the oldest and most established maritime welfare charities in the world. And we work across 200 ports spanning 50 countries. And as I say, in an average year, we will look after around about 500,000 seafarers and their families. That support comes in a wide variety of ways. So we have over 120 seafarers centres, seamen's clubs, flying angel centres, you name it. They have very weird and wonderful names across the industry. People remember spending time at the Mish. And so we still have seafarers centres in strategic locations where it's possible for crews to come ashore, to connect with home. We also spend a lot of time, though, providing support to seafarers' families. And we now have active family programmes across the Philippines, across India and in Myanmar, where we provide education and training and community for a wide range of seafarers' families, both local, small connected families right the way through to extended members of the family, so that they too have a sense of belonging and are able to understand what it's going to be like when their loved ones are away from home, and they can seek help and the support that they need. We also get involved in a wide range of what we call justice and welfare cases, and so we provide a lot of support every year to seafarers who sadly are perhaps working in the lower end of the sector and who suffer from abandonment, who suffer from trauma, mismanagement, human rights abuses, and we provide support to those seafarers, particularly in places where perhaps the international regulatory framework is not quite so strong. And we also do, I suppose, to round it all off, more training with seafarers, particularly particularly with cadets. And so we now provide training in financial literacy, helping seafarers to manage their money better. We look at communication, sustaining relationships whilst they're away from home for such a long time. And perhaps most importantly of all, in the last couple of years, we have been training seafarers to become suicide aware. And so we provide a specific course through an organization called Living Works, which teaches people to understand the signs of those who might be experiencing suicide, tips on how to keep them safe, and how to safeguard themselves when perhaps they are feeling at the lowest ebb during their maritime career. So we have a multiple number of pathways that we provide support to seafarers and their families. And I think it is also that diversity of service that we provide, which makes being here and going to work every day such a real interesting joy.
If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice.
You mentioned, or rather the website has mentioned, that the mission carries out approximately 50,000 ship visits a year. That is a phenomenal number. What does a ship visit entail?
A ship visit can entail absolutely everything and absolutely nothing. Every single one of them is different, but as a general rule, a local port welfare team will try and visit the majority, if not all, of the ships that come into their port. They'll welcome the crew on board and they'll provide them with information about the local area. So if they are lucky enough to have shore leave, which unfortunately, and I'm sure we'll come onto it, is an ever disappearing feature of life at sea at the moment. But if seafarers are able to go ashore, then we will provide them with transportation to and from either our Seafarers Centre or indeed to the local community if that's where they want to go. We'll also, though, take on board materials that they might want. So we often have connections to home. So we'll have MiFi units, we'll have SIM cards, data cards, ways in which they can connect with home if that's what they wish. But also sometimes they just want to have a chat. They just want to take 10 to 15 minutes out of their incredibly busy day to talk about the weather, to talk about the football, to talk about life at home. Just a chance for them really to kind of reconnect. So for us, our ship visiting service is very much kind of the initial segue into how seafarers might wish to spend their time in port, either with us or using our services. But also it's a way just for seafarers to reconnect with human kindness, actually, because it is a very unfamiliar and a very alien landscape to be a seafarer on board a ship for such a long period of time. And so if we're able just to alleviate just for a short few minutes in a day, that can have a profound effect on their mental health and their well-being.
Yeah, I mean, again, I was reading seafarers, they transport over 90% of the world's goods and fuels. You've mentioned they spend a long time at sea. That could be 9 months away from families, and that's an approximate, not as long or as short as it could be. They face unique challenges which land-based workers are unlikely to experience. You've talked about isolation, you've talked about mental health, and you've also talked about how families cope. So when a seafarer or a family member contacts you, what can they expect? What is the first thing you try and establish when somebody contacts you?
The most important thing to try and establish is what really is at the heart of the issue. And that might sound obvious, but so often seafarers come to us and their families come to us saying that they have one particular issue, but actually it is sort of a mask for something which is far more deep-seated. And perhaps there is a bit of shame or embarrassment and they're sort of unsure how to talk about it. And so the most important thing that we try and offer when we first speak to seafarers and their families is to remind them that we are an impartial voice connected to industry, but certainly not formally in industry in the same way that other stakeholders might be, and that we are a listening ear and that we can help. We might not be able to help directly, but we are able to signpost. So, for example, for families, particularly in the Philippines, they may come to us with money troubles. They may come to us with health issues. They may not have health insurance, for example. example, because it may not be covered when the seafarer is out of contract. And so we have a network of medical providers who can offer either free or very low cost medical advice and services, so that those seafarers and families can get the support that they need. If it's a seafarer on board a ship and they are abandoned, then of course our immediate need is to make sure that their everyday essentials are taken care of. And just recently, I signed off £6,000 worth of food and water to be taken out to a ship, because that was their absolute immediate need. And that then gives us time to then work with those seafarers to understand what the real situation is, maybe where any fault lies, and then try and start that process of supporting the seafarer and working with the right stakeholders to bring about a satisfactory resolution. So I think the overriding message I would always want to give to the seafarers, and indeed to shipping companies that come to us and ask us for help with their own crews, is that we are that impartial, non-judgmental voice for everybody within the shipping industry, particularly the world's seafarers, of any faith, of no faith, of any sexuality, of any race, of any gender. We are absolutely here for you with a non-judgmental ear. And if we can help you, then we will certainly do all that we can to do so.
When you say if we can help you, I'm assuming in some parts of the world there is red tape which makes this ever more challenging than it should be.
Yeah, it can be, certainly. And I think, we're certainly seeing around the world a tightening up of security in ports, which makes it quite difficult for seafarers to get access to shore leave. But the flip side of that is that actually it makes it difficult for welfare providers to go to some of those vessels and to actively provide support. So that I think there's a real education piece that is needed within the industry. I think it's all very well to build really technologically advanced ports, to make them as quick and efficient as possible, absolutely, to use as much technology as we can. But ultimately, I think sometimes we do that at the expense of remembering that there are real people with real lives and with everyday challenges, just like you and I might have, and that we forget actually that basic human need of the seafarers on board. And so red tape does, unfortunately, get in the way of sometimes providing service, but also so does stigma. Maybe there's a misunderstanding around mental health and well-being. Maybe there's a misunderstanding around sexuality, or a prejudice against sexuality or seafarers from a particular nationality, etc., and racism. And so we have a lot of work to do to work with local stakeholders, what we call port welfare committees, with harbour masters, with security, etc., to get them to just see the humanity that is the seafarers working on board the ship, and then to provide the support that we can do. And it's amazing when you actually do have those conversations with those types of senior stakeholders. I think, as I say, it's very easy in a very busy modern world to just forget sometimes about the humanity in so much of life, frankly, but particularly in shipping. But actually, when you start to have those conversations with port CEOs, with wider stakeholders, actually they do remember what it was like maybe to sail, or indeed to be isolated. And so they very much want to try and do the very best that they can within the rules that they have. I mean, obviously, we have to work within a framework, but do all that they can to ensure that the people visiting their ports and using their ships and working on their ships have the support that they need.
We've talked just then about the industry doing more, but what does actual tangible support look like?
I think the primary thing is to recognise that actually seafarers have a legal right to shore leave. Seafarers have a legal right to port welfare facilities, whatever shape they are. And we're seeing, certainly at the moment, ports being built and being redesigned, and that humanity, that human element, which is a phrase I broadly dislike, but the humanity of it forgotten about. And so there is a real need for ports to take intentional action, particularly port operators, I think, to take intentional action to ensure that there is welfare support available in their ports. In an ideal world, I'd like it to be, just as important as when they're discussing where the security nets go and where the customs areas are. It is absolutely fundamental, because it's not just a nice thing to have. It is actually fundamental for maritime safety, that if you have people working on board vessels who are well rested, are properly paid, have got shore leave, have got time off, they are going to be better at their jobs. They're going to be more competent, more alert, and ultimately they're going to operate in a much safer environment. So I think the overriding support I would like to see from the widest possible areas of the sector is an intentionality to include seafarers as part of the discussion when they are designing ships, when they are designing ports, when they are just every element where a seafarer might be connected. We've got to make sure that they are properly considered and consulted.
That is a good point, actually. The Seafarers Happiness Index. This is crucial, isn't it, for seafarers to be part of this?
Absolutely.
Tell me more about it. How can they be involved? When do they need to be part of this? And I know that you recently just unveiled the most recent results. So what does it look like as a next step?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Seafarers Happiness Index has been going now for 10 years, and we call it a barometer of social change. It's not intended to be a rigorous scientific academic survey. It is intended to be a sort of touch point about what seafarers are thinking at a particular point in time during their voyage. And I'm incredibly grateful to the tens of thousands of seafarers who take part in it every year. And of course, we would love to have more. But it does give a very varying picture. I think what always comes across in the happiness index is this overwhelming feeling of pride on the part of the seafarer, that they are incredibly proud and happy and pleased and honoured to some extent to be working on a ship and to be a seafarer. But actually, it's all the other things around it. So, many of them love the fact that they've got greater access to communication with their families through the provision of Wi-Fi, for example. But the downside to that is obviously that they now are much more in contact with shoreside officers who perhaps don't necessarily understand the mechanics of a system, of a watch system, of a rotor, and so ends up actually becoming a pressure point for seafarers to work under, because that sort of expectation and that communication setting doesn't necessarily seem to be there. Seafarers talk about the lack of shore leave, and they have done probably certainly before COVID. It was a much better position. During COVID, understandably, shore leave couldn't happen. But sadly, we're not at a point where, shore leave is actively being taken, either because the formal reception facilities are not in place. There might not be a proper inspection available. There might not be immigration available. But also the workload might be so great that they just have to work through their time off, their relaxing time, in order to get the work done. And obviously that puts additional pressure points on. So it's a moving picture, as you might expect me to say, but generally I think the real the two big themes that always come out at the moment are this overwhelming pride. However, sometimes the shore side doesn't necessarily understand what life is really like on board the ship, and that there is a bit of a disconnect there. And crucially, that seafarers are just not able to have access to the shore leave that they absolutely crave. Not just because they want to go and experience life maybe in a different culture and spend a few hours in an exciting place if they're lucky enough to be in a port that's right in a city centre, but they just want time away. They just want to be able to take a breath. And who of us doesn't sometimes need to get out of the office just for 5 minutes, And so I think it's really important that, again, that intentionality comes across, and that we really work with industry to put some proper protocols in place to ensure and to some extent enforce seafarers to take the shore leave that they really, really need. But if seafarers want to take part in the index, they just have to visit the seafarershappinessindex.org, or they can download our MTS app, which is called Happy at Sea, and they can have their say. And we really want to hear from as many seafarers as possible, because actually, whilst there are plenty of really good imitations. The Happiness Index is the original and is really, really well regarded as far as I'm concerned, and is actively listened to by industry. So, if seafarers really want to put their views across, then they can do no worse than, or no better, I should say, than going through the Happiness Index.
And actually, I'm glad as an event organizer, we're able to amplify that message. We talk about the index at our events in the Philippines, in the Middle East, etc. And that's part of our global strategic partnership now, is to help amplify all these messages that we've discussed just now as well. I just want to touch on, you talked about suicide awareness courses. Is suicide disproportionate to seafarers to the rest of people at land?
I mean, certainly there seems to be an elevated risk, and it certainly is seems to be more considered by seafarers. I think one of the issues that industry has had with so much of the industry, quite frankly, but particularly on this issue, is that there has been widespread underreporting, or worse, there's been no reporting on the number of deaths at sea, and we are beginning to see that change, and that is only a good thing. Of course, there have been some really good studies done by the ITF Seafarers Trust a few years ago in partnership with Yale University, and actually of their respondents at that time, 20% of them had said that they had considered suicide in the past 2 weeks. Certainly we have a number of seafarers who will contact us on a regular basis. I had one just last week who had emailed in and said, that he was feeling really isolated on board. He was subject to what he felt was a bullying and harassment claim on board by the other crew, and he was completely convinced that his only way out was to take his own life, to the point that he'd got a plan and he knew exactly when he was going to do it. And actually our global network of trained crisis intervention team were able to keep in touch with him, were able to follow that vessel to the different ports that he was going to create that safety net, so that he felt that he wasn't alone and that actually he did have other options. And I'm pleased to say that the company have taken action to get him home early, to get him in front of some medical support, but actually having somebody on the ground who has got some basic skills just in keeping somebody safe. That's all we're talking about, keeping somebody safe for the time being until you can get proper, competent, qualified support in place, has proved to be invaluable. And certainly it is something that my colleagues are involved with, on a very, very regular basis.
The shipping industry is worldwide, and as trade continues to move around the world, so does the need for more presence from the mission to seafarers. We've talked in the past, because we've met in Dubai, and we've talked about the work you do in the UAE. What does the rest of the region look like in the GCC?
We are very excited actually about the opportunities that are presenting themselves across that region. My colleague John, who is our Middle East and South Asia regional director based in Cyprus, leads a team that spans in Jordan. We have a team in Egypt. We have a team in Bahrain, and we also have a significant team over the other side in India. But we are very interested in opening up in Saudi Arabia, and we have been having extensive discussions with government stakeholders to really go in there for the first time. There are plenty of ports there which are in need of seafarers' welfare provision, and based on both our global long history, but also the fact that we were first invited into the UAE by the founding sheikh in 1962 and have been part of the UAE story, its maritime story since then. That's a story that we're really proud of, and a story that we want to work with other governments across the GCC to ensure that they have adequate welfare provision for their crews coming in. And so certainly Saudi is very much on our list of places that we are hoping to open in the next 12 to 18 months.
And of course, we're going to see you in Dammam in the Eastern Province in a few weeks' time, in fact.
Indeed, and I'm very excited. It's going to be my first time to Seatrade at the Dammam event, and I'm really looking forward to meeting lots of different stakeholders and getting a sense for just the enthusiasm for the industry, which is really growing and coming out of Saudi Arabia and the wider area.
And what more can event organisers like ourselves do to support the mission?
Well, the support that you give us and continue to give us is so hugely grateful. You help to amplify our voice, and in such a crowded industry, it's a big industry, but it's also quite a small industry. Being part of these conversations, it is so often at these maritime events where the issues of seafarers' welfare are discussed, and particularly at the Seatrade brand of events. And so for us to be able to meet with key stakeholders, for us to be able to have conversations both publicly and behind closed doors in a non-judgmental way, to work with partners, is absolutely vital. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. And I know that my colleagues in the development department and across the entire MTS family share in that gratitude for the support that you give us. So thank you very much.
On behalf of Seatrade Maritime, thank you for those words. Last but not least, I was speaking to one of your colleagues, Ed, and he was telling us about woolly hats and what we need to do with woolly hats. What's this all about?
Well, Woolly Hat Day. Woolly hats are, anyone that's ever been to sea and has ever been to a seafarers centre run by the Mission, or actually any of the other societies that do similar work, there will always be woolly hats available for crew, and seafarers absolutely love them. And so we have an annual campaign where we encourage people to knit woolly hats. If you can't knit, you can always go and buy woolly hats. They don't have to be knitted, but they are an incredibly useful resource for seafarers. You'd be amazed how many seafarers turn up in the northeast of England in the middle of January and have just come in flip-flops, shorts and a t-shirt, and don't realise that it's going to be that cold when they get onto Tyneside, for example. But for many seafarers, it sort of taps into that pride. It's almost like a badge of honour, and they love to have these woolly hats that we give out, and they're knitted by armies of people. Last year we gave over 1.4 tons of knitted woolly hats across our global network. So in addition to just having volunteers who want to knit and want to provide us with that material, and you don't have to send it to London, you can send it to any one of our centres across the globe. We also have our Woolly Hat Day campaign, which is a way for industry to get involved and to wear a woolly hat for seafarers. And so certainly keep an eye on our website and you'll see more about it there.
So Ben, the final shout out, what is the website address?
For all information, come to www.missiontoseafarers.org, and there you will find everything. Even if you're a seafarer, you will also find access to all of our welfare facilities for you. So missiontoseafarers.org. Brilliant.
Ben, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks very much for having me, Emma. See you in Saudi.
See you in Saudi.
Thank you for listening to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, and we look forward to joining you on our next episode.